Okay, great. So I want to thank you all for coming. I'm David Blockstein of the neighborhood and member of the host committee. And I know there are a lot of other things to do than to be outside on a hot evening like this. So we thank you for coming. Our purpose here is to actually have a conversation with County Executive Marc Elrich and Delegate Jhanealle Wilkins, and so we will have an opportunity for that. I also want to introduce our other District 20 delegate. Jhanealle's going to be introduced more formally in a moment, but Lorig Charkoudian, who has to go to another event, but Lorig is here also representing our District 20 delegation. So thank you all for being here, and I will turn it over to Teresa Warman, who is the campaign manager for the campaign to re-elect the county executive.
Thanks, David. Hey guys, I know most of you, but I'm Teresa Warman. I'm Marc's campaign manager, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we're having this conversation. I think that it's an elephant in the room that a lot of people my age, millennials, have a little bit of a misconception about what Marc's views on housing are. So what we are here to do is just to hash out those differences, because I think you'll see that Jhanealle and Marc will both have different approaches, you know, both from the local level and the state level, but also because different generations suffered from different house buying experiences. So yeah, we're here to have that conversation. This is question and answer. So if you have a question, please make sure to ask it, because Marc will be here until the last question is answered. So thank you.
Best Robert Reich, and then realize you don't have TV screens the size in front of you. So it's less direct. But I just want to lay the landscape for what's happening in Montgomery County today, so people understand what I'm concerned about in terms of affordable housing and the future of Montgomery County. We have we've had one single policy for most of the last 30, 40 years, and that was moderately priced dwelling units. And Montgomery County used to require 12.5% of the development to be affordable to people earning about 60 to 75% of area median income, which today would translate to $60,000 to $75,000, and that was our policy. And it may be because we didn't have huge amounts of poverty in the county that we never thought about building housing for people below that level. And there used to be, market housing was built just above the MPDU level, so it served people who were making more than 75%, but it didn't rely on only building for wealthy people, which is what's happening in Bethesda, which is the poster child for the worst of this madness. So I just wanted to start by, this is the landscape of who lives in Montgomery County today. There are 30,000 households who are earning between, up to 30% of area median income, up to about $30,000. And of those 30,000 households, the 3,888 are cost burdened, which means they pay much more than 30%, and then severely burdened, which is the 25,000 people are spending 50 to 60% of their incomes on housing. We have zero policies to address 25,000 people. Next category, people earning $31,000 to about $50,000. 18,700 households in that category, 15,000 people spending 50 to 60% of their incomes on housing.
Marc, when you say people, are you talking about households?
It's households. So it can be anything from families to single-person households.
Okay, thanks.
And then from 51 to 65%, I've got 14,000 people who are cost burdened, and of those 13,000. So if you took these three groups together, you wind up with about, 53,000 people severely burdened, for whom we have no plan. And then you get into this range, which is the moderately priced dwelling unit range, and you only have about 2,800 people who are severely burdened, because a lot of those people are living in moderately priced dwelling units. Montgomery County says that our moderately priced dwelling unit program is the national model. And there was probably a time when it was. We were probably the first people to require a set aside of affordable housing. But the architects of that plan were either short-sighted or optimistic. I'm not sure which it was. But they only put 10 or 20-year limits on the rents or the prices of the units. So you can imagine what happens 10 or 20 years later, almost all those units are gone. By 2025, every unit that was created before 2005 will be gone. Because in 2005, the county started requiring permanent 99-year affordability rather than limited time affordability. So there's about 11,000 of the units that were originally produced will be gone. We have about 6,700 moderately priced dwelling units in a county of 1.1 million peoples, and this is our signature affordable housing program, which is not much of a signature. And then there are people over 80% of median income. There's about 56,000 people who have some burden, and there's about 11,000 who are severely cost burdened. And 80% of AMI is about $80,000. I didn't used to think that would, $80,000 seems like a rather reasonable income, but in Montgomery County it's not. And I'll give you an example in Bethesda where when we do moderately priced dwelling units in Bethesda, the rental cost is about $1,600 to $1,800 for a two-bedroom, $1,600 for a one-bedroom. The jump to market rate, a one-bedroom in Bethesda in the new buildings after 2012 is $2,500 and up, and I mean up. And a two-bedroom apartment where a family might go is $4,000. So this isn't working for people. It doesn't work at all. And that's what exists today. So if you take the severely burdened people just in these two groups, you wind up with almost 30,000 people who are stuck. This is the projection for who's coming here by 2030. They say that there are going to be 40,000 new households in Montgomery County by 2030. And of those new households, a quarter of them are going to be market rate. Now, for sake of argument, they're arguing market rate is between 75 and 100% of AMI or higher, but in reality, it's skewed about 50-50 of people over 100% and people below 100%. But that's 10,000 people. The other 30,000 people are going to earn less than 75% of AMI, and 20,000 of the 30,000 will earn $50,000 or less. So again, those folks, no plan for how to house them, and that's half the people who are coming here. And then I need affordable housing for a quarter of the people who are coming here. That's another 10,000. And our policy is, if I build 10,000 market rate units, which is what we're projected to need, I will get 1,500 moderately priced dwelling units. The math doesn't work, and I've been arguing with people since they started going down this road that your math doesn't work. You can't house the people you say you're coming here with policies that produce 1,500 units for 30,000 people. It is just a major disconnect. But they're not interested in that because there's a belief they can just build market housing. And this is where I diverge pretty much with most of the other people in the council. Their chant is build more housing, whatever it is. If you don't purpose build housing, you will not get affordable housing. We don't get units that are priced for moderately priced people, but for the ones that we require. We sure as hell don't get units for the people below that. And ironically, we're not getting we're not getting housing for people who are earning between $75,000 and $100,000. I never thought, I'll get to my recommendations at the end, but I never thought I'd recommend providing partially subsidized housing for people earning $100,000. But if we want folks in that group to be able to live in Montgomery County, young professionals who make a little too much to get into an MPDU, but not enough money to get into what's market being built, those people will be lost, and we can't afford to lose them. So we need to change our policy approach to things. So this kind of encapsulated, so this is our existing deficit, 40,000 cost-burdened households, 29,000 are severely cost-burdened, 30,000 new households wanting to come here. And this is the kicker to all of this. In about the year 2000, we had, in about 2000, we had about 45,000 naturally occurring affordable housing units. That meant they weren't controlled, there weren't rent control, there was nothing on them. You could go and rent an apartment. There were 45,000 of those units. Today, there are half that many units. And Park and Planning is projected, and these aren't my numbers. None of these numbers are my numbers. They all come from Park and Planning or from the research groups that were hired by them to do their work. So Park and Planning is projecting by 2030, we lose another 7,000 to 11,000 of those units. So in 2000, we had 45,000. We will have as low as 10,000 units by 2030. That's a loss of 30,000 units in 3 decades of this century. That is a major problem because those people will be added to all these other people who will be competing for existing housing. So we require 12.5% to 15%. We require 15% affordable in Bethesda. Most of the rest of the county, we only require 12.5%. Every once in a while, if we make a deal, particularly if the county has leverage, like on county property, we can get a higher percentage of affordable units, but that's not the norm. The developers own their private property. They don't need to make deals with any of us. So only when I've got skin in the game can the county make a deal. So this is what I said before, so if 40,000 households come here, you're going to have this major problem of what's left over for everybody else and how do you house these people. And again, we don't have any policies to deal with this. And I've been on the council, I was on the council for 12 years. I put in 2 rent control bills to the council because I saw this coming. I knew where we were going to go, and if we do not protect existing affordable housing, then the affordable housing is going to be gone. Poof, gone. Arlington lost all of their units. There was an article in the paper, and the only units that are left in Arlington were the units that were built deliberately as affordable units. The other stuff is disappearing. Alexandria is having the same problem. If you don't deliberately build stuff, you don't get it, and all this stuff is getting lost. So what is being built in Montgomery County today? So this is as of January 2021. So there are 18 developments then that had signed agreements. So these are projects that were going to go forward. They were going to build 4,239 units. I was going to get 734 moderately priced dwelling units. There are 28,000 units, what we call the pipeline, means they've been approved by Park and Planning. They don't need any more approval. All a developer has to do is go and pull a building permit. So when people say they wonder why nothing's happening here and they blame the government, they think it must be something we're doing. Actually, you've got 32,000 housing units waiting to be built that all somebody needs a permit for. And this is a low number because we've approved thousands of units, literally thousands of units, since January 21. So you got to ask yourself, why aren't these units being built? And if they were all built, I'd still wind up with only 5,000 affordable units. So nowhere near the demand of who's coming here. Now, if you ask the developers why they're not building, they'll give you, well, the biggest reason they give you is the lack of jobs. And because the people don't have incomes, and that's where the jobs come in, retail incomes won't buy the housing they want to build. So they don't have high-end paying jobs or high enough paying jobs to justify breaking ground and building housing projects. So despite the large number of units that have been approved, they're just dribbling out as the developer thinks there's enough unsatisfied market need to build a project, and then they build a project. Look, I get that. You can't force people to build housing for whom nobody is going to build anything. The learners in White Flint are sitting on over 6,000 approved units. Jonathan in White Oak is sitting on over 6,000 approved units. All somebody has to do is build, but unless they believe there's a market for it, they don't build it. And the other problem they're having, other than the jobs, is just the price. And they'll flat out tell you people can't afford the apartments they want to build. The incomes, the rents they expect are higher than the rents that they're willing to build for. Part of that is a self-inflicted wound by Montgomery County. We got obsessed with height because height was density. And the problem with height is the taller you go, the more expensive the buildings get. And so you do not get more affordable housing units because you build higher. It doesn't make it cheaper to build those units. And so that is stalled out as a source of affordable housing. And you got to have a lot of demand to absorb a tall building, and so you don't get a lot of buildings built at the same time. I mean, these people are not stupid. I mean, they're not bad and they're not stupid. You don't build more housing units than there's demand for. I mean, that's logical, I get it. But it's the reality of the way the economy works. So you deal with it. But they're not building because they don't have the incomes they want, and they don't believe the jobs are here. This is why I've been pushing so hard in bringing jobs to Montgomery County, because if I can bring more jobs here, particularly if I can bring jobs in the tech sphere and the bioscience sphere, they will be high enough paying that they will be able to move the units. And if they can move the units, that'll get us a modicum of affordable units. But as you can see from these numbers, it'll get me units, but nowhere near what I need in order to deal with the crisis that we've got. And here's I put two poster children on here, I call them. This is Battery Lane in Bethesda, and this is happening in real time. There are 2 stories in Bethesda Beat over the last 2 months about 2 apartment developments. This one here they're both on Battery Lane, which is the first lane you get into if you come in from the Beltway and you take Woodmont Avenue, and Battery goes into Woodmont. These are the old red brick apartment buildings that were built in the 60s. They were meant to house the workforce. If you look at the original master plan and general plan, they actually talked about why they were zoning for these low-rise buildings in places like Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton. They were zoned for the workforce. People back then used the word workforce. The single-family neighborhoods outside of that were thought to be too far from where transit was going to wind up. And even in 1964, they knew that the closer you are to transit, the more likely you are to use it, and the farther away you are, you're not going to use it. So the single-family neighborhoods were less dense, and the core of Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton were meant to be more dense. So these are existing units that were built in that time. In one project, there are 87 units today. The 1-bedrooms are about $1,600. The 2-bedrooms are about $1,800. Spread over 87 units. We gave the developer the density to build 400 new units. In exchange for 400 units, the developer gave us 60 moderately priced dwelling units. So the county gives away enough density to the developer to build massively more units, more than 4 times the units that are there today, and our policies say, give me 60 units back, which is 15% of 400, and we're even. But we're not even. We just lost 27 units. It's worse on this other project. Today, there are 477 units in that development. They're 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. The 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units are about the same price that I said before, 60 in the 1600s and the 1800s. The 3-bedroom units are about $3,000, so I won't count them as naturally occurring affordable housing, but they're not totally terrible. They're just difficult for a lot of people. But the 1 and 2 bedrooms make up the majority of the 477 units. We've given this developer the ability to build 1,130 units, and in exchange, we will get somewhere between 170 and 220 units. We will be net loss of about 200 units over what we have today. This is the policies we have in Montgomery County. They're not going to solve the problem. They're not going to deal with current needs. None of this will solve the deficit in current housing. All it does is exacerbate the number of people who are going to be looking for housing. Once these people get evicted and the new buildings get built, they're toast because they're not going to find another place to live. So the question comes down to, what do you do? And none of this is easy. I mean, I will not be loved by the developers for my suggestions, but we have no other way out of this mess. There is no other way. You got to either make regulations that produce enough housing so you can actually be sustainable, or you might as well stop talking about affordable housing. So the first thing I would do, I put rent stabilization on the neighborhoods that where the buildings were built before 2005, because none of those buildings will have remaining any kind of restrictions on affordability. So those are the ones I would put under stabilization. They're the older buildings in the county. They're the most vulnerable. They're the ones that somebody's likely to redevelop and displace the tenants. And when that happens, those units are gone. And our staff has outlined, highlighted a bunch of communities in Montgomery County that are primarily minority, primarily have incomes in the lower income ranges, under 50% of median income, and these are going to be targets for redevelopment. So I would put rent stabilization over the older parts. I would not include new construction. A, because I don't want to launch a war with the developers who are afraid I'll take money out of their pocket. And B, new construction, if you can pay $4,000 for an apartment, I don't need to protect you with rent control. Why fight over that? So they can have at it, we'll get affordable units out of it, but I don't need a battle over that. I'm trying to preserve what's on the ground today. Second, we have to require a higher percentage of affordable units. You know, people talk about complete streets. We need to do complete communities. So you can't let developers build a smattering of housing for people who are at the lowest ends of society economically, and then build all luxury housing on the other end. And we've got to develop the courage to say, maybe we need about a third of your development to be affordable to people between $30,000 and $100,000. And we can figure out how to split it up. But all those groups need housing, and we should start requiring it. And I know from the statistics we have, that a developer won't lose money on projects that serve people at 70% or $70,000, and most of them won't lose money on $60,000 units. But they will lose money on $50,000 and $30,000, people who can earn $50,000 and $30,000, and that's where we need to step in with subsidy. But we have a role in this. You can't expect them, you can't get blood from a rock, right? So you've got to figure out how do you help get to that point. But I know also that they will make money on the other stuff, they just won't make as much money. And none of us gets to tell the bank what interest rate we'd like, and they need to live in the same world we live in. Third, we've got to develop our own properties, and so I've put 18 county properties up for sale. We're not going to try to, it's not, for sale is the wrong word. We're not looking for any money for the land. We're going to give the land away, put it on a 99-year lease. But the other side of it is we're going to require total affordability. We have a model that we're doing in, as sort of like Aspen Hill. It's on Bushy Drive and Veers Mill Road. None of you are old enough to remember the Roundhouse Theater. Maybe a couple of you are. So the Roundhouse Theater used to be up there. So we're doing 192 unit development, and all the units are affordable between $30,000 and $75,000 incomes, more or less. And that's going to be our model for the other 18 lots, except we're going to bump the top end to $100,000 or somewhere around there, so we can actually serve this wider range of people. But 18 is a start. I don't know how many units I'll get out of it, but taking the cost of the land out of the equation is going to bring the cost of the project down significantly. They won't have to finance that. And I'm optimistic that we'll actually be able to move forward. We have over 90 bids on the 18 lots, and we got bids from national companies that have never built in Montgomery County before. And when I put out an earlier project, I actually got bids from people, and then they gave me what I wanted. This is another lesson I learned. You don't get what you don't ask for. So if you assume they're not going to come to the table, then you never put on the table what you really want, and then you just reconfirm that you're never going to get what you really want. And what we've found is by saying what we want, there are developers who want to do business here enough that they will figure out how to work with the numbers we're talking about. And I'm really encouraged by that. I have met some really decent people who are willing to negotiate and work out reasonable deals. In Bethesda, we've got a project on Wisconsin Avenue, 2 buildings, where we're getting ownership units, and the developer lowered the price of all the units for the lower income households, and they lowered the condo price, which nobody's ever done before, and they spread the price of the units and the condo fees on the market rate units in order to make these affordable. And they did this because they were the 3rd developer who came in and wanted an exemption from the moderately priced ownership program. And the first 2 got exemptions from the program. They said, they have to give us the unit at an affordable price, but they don't have to take away the condo fees. So they would give us the unit, and they say, so sad, the tenant can't afford the condo fee in the unit, so we'll give you $133,000 and go away. $133,000 doesn't buy another unit anywhere. It doesn't solve my problem, so I told my staff we're saying no from now on. And after these guys were upset that we said no for a few minutes, they came back and they said, this is what we'll do. And I'm really happy about that, because it's a sign, again, that people will negotiate with you if you act like you're negotiating. And it's like negotiation 101. But I'm happy about that, because we're going to use that as a model. We're going to change the law so no developer can escape it, because once one developer has demonstrated they can pass on the cost of the units and the condo fees, then we can say, obviously, this is feasible, and so the rest of you are going to have to do it too. And I'm hoping the council will support that. I don't know. We need a no net loss of affordable housing policy. You have to take situations like the ones I showed you on the other page in Bethesda and say, if there are 60 units affordable today, you will give me 60 units as the baseline going forward, and then I need some additional units for growth. Because if I don't have additional units for growth, all I'm doing is spinning my wheels. I protect what I have, but I haven't done anything to move us forward to where we need to go. And we actually had luck with this. There is an interest, and I think we can negotiate these things more often. In Twinbrook, the county had a tiny sliver of property that was close to worthless, except that a developer can take the acreage and then make a calculation of how much density they would have gotten, and they can spread it over the rest of the property even if they can't build on it. And they wanted it for free, and the council actually asked me to give it to the developer for free. And I said, why would I? And I didn't, and we wound up with a deal where we got units at 30% of affordability, we got units up to 70% of affordability, and we got the most important thing, we got the right to return, which sounds familiar to some people. The council had gotten the right to apply, and what happens when you have the right to apply is you apply. If your income's too low or you have bad credit, you fail, but you had the right to apply. We got an agreement with the owners that if the tenants are in good standing with the owner in terms of currency on rent payments, they're not going to look at credit, they're not going to look at income, and they'll return them to new units in the building at prices that are comparable to what they were been paying. And that's not just for my little sliver of buildings. This is over a multi-hundred unit project because we asked for it, and they really wanted our land. So I've found success in strange ways, and I like the way it works. And the other thing is we have to invest in new ways of building. You know, I started out wanting to do container housing, and we've been talking to companies that do container housing, but nobody's at scale. We're talking to a company that's building 400 square foot units for about $50,000. They're stackable and they're joinable, and we're actually going to send a group of people out to their factory. First of all, to look at the units to see if they meet Montgomery County code and if we can use them. And second, to see whether they would bring a factory back here, because what I'd really like to do is to bring a housing factory back to Montgomery County or Prince George's County, whoever's got the land to put the thing up, where we can actually produce these units locally and use them. We can stack them, we can put them on top of existing buildings. It's a lot of stuff we can do. We're looking at our garages. A lot of our garages, we can add 4 or 5 stories of building on top of that. So that's where we're trying to go. We're trying to innovate our way into a more effective construction system. We're working with people to lower the price, and I think we've got partnerships with developers that'll actually get us into a better place. But they would not exist if I hadn't asked for them. And that's my takeaway out of this. So the hard thing is I don't know how to crack that total number. When you look at, you take 40,000 and add another 30,000, add another 10,000. In order to get 70,000 affordable units, even if you got half of those units, even if you required a developer to give you half of their units in that, you would need 140,000 units just to yield. And that's more units than they plan on building by 2050. And so it is hard to think about how you deal. This is why rent stabilization becomes extra important, because if I can't put a lock on rents, these people are toast. They may struggle, but I've got to try to find a way to keep the rents from outrunning the increases in their paychecks. We've got programs to do more job training. I believe that we'll be able to lift more people into higher paid jobs. My goal is to bring more higher paid jobs there. I think that's going to be a positive. But I can't honestly look anybody in the face and say I know how to build 70,000 units, because I don't. And the only saving grace is nobody else knows how to do that either. It's not like you can point to any other jurisdiction that said, yeah, we did this. And there's this DC consortium that's called HAND, and they're the ones that came up with the growth projections for the different counties. They did a report a month ago, and they basically said nobody in the region is building affordable housing. They're building market rate housing, but they're not building housing for the people who need it most, because frankly, nobody would do any of these things, which are the things you have to do if you're willing to do that. And people have got to deal with, that's the economic reality of this. Unless the government, the federal government, because the state government doesn't have this kind of money, unless somebody dumped billions of dollars on us so we could subsidize everything, absent massive subsidies, it's really hard to get to those numbers. And you know, my problem with the first numbers was their miscalculation of incomes in Montgomery County, which they thought, they calculated our incomes at about $10 an hour wages. We had a $15 minimum wage. And the problem with that is that they skewed the number of units I had to produce at the lowest level to a much larger number because they used the wrong wage number. And someone tells me that these were experts who did these calculations. I said, if you don't even know the wages in Montgomery County, you're not much of an expert. The other thing that I found troubling is they projected a higher percentage of low-income housing in Montgomery County than in the surrounding counties, particularly the Virginia counties. And that's their estimate of how they assess our economic development plans, which is way too much retail and way too little better-paying jobs. And other jurisdictions have focused on bringing in high-paying jobs, like we get criticized for what Fairfax does. They're not interested in blanketing the universe in retail. They're interested in bringing better-paying jobs into Fairfax. So I looked at that number as sort of a reflection of our lack of planning and lack of ambition, rather than this is cast in stone. So I'll stop there. And Jhanealle, you want to ask questions?
Well, thank you so much to the county executive for holding this conversation. It's a really important topic of housing in our community. And I think that you really outlined the problem very, very well. And just to back it up and introduce myself a little bit, actually, I am State Delegate Jhanealle Wilkins. I represent District 20 along with Lord Charkoudian, who was here earlier, Delegate David Moon, and our Senator, Senator Smith. Really excited to be here and be part of the conversation. And I'm also coming to this issue, as Teresa said, as a millennial myself, as someone who just about 3 days ago closed on a home after a 5-month search. Yay! And so the idea of affordability, especially knowing this district so well and the market so well from just finishing the home buying process, it is truly a major challenge. I can say for me, Tacoma Park, completely priced out, right? The Silver Spring area, downtown Silver Spring, completely priced out. And so I can say from personal experience what happens when millennials, who are now more and more becoming the largest part of the workforce. We are now of age when we're looking to buy a home of our own. And at a time like this, during this housing crisis at that, what we're seeing is families, when they start wanting to buy a home, they leave Montgomery County. They go to Prince George's, folks are moving to Charles. We are not only are the numbers that you were showing really important, but thinking about the people we are also losing because home ownership or being able to live in an affordable apartment is becoming more and more out of reach. So to the county executive, I think my role here is to help moderate the rest of the conversation, which might have to cut a little short if this rainstorm happens. I wanted to ask the county executive, and my role is to kind of push and unpack a little bit more about what you were saying. I think this is a really important plan that you've outlined. At the beginning, you talked about specific numbers, the tens of thousands short that we are. Do you have any sense of how close we're going to get to the issue with the plan that you've outlined? That's part one of the question. And also, as county executive, I think you have a really ambitious plan. We know that rent stabilization, although it's something that I support, is a very challenging issue on the council. And depending on what the county council looks like, we're going to need, we know we're going to need, what, six votes? Six votes in order to get it done. So depending on what our county council looks like, that'll be really important. How are you going to be able to really lead and chart forth this vision with the incoming council to really help make this a reality? The second part of the question.
So, I mean, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with whoever gets elected, to start meeting with them and talking about what the situation is in Montgomery County. I don't think people know any of this. I didn't know there were only 6,700 MPDUs left until I saw this chart buried someplace. and it had the additions and subtractions, and I'm like, holy blank, how did this happen? So, part of this, like I said, I can't get to 70,000. I can look at, if I have 20 properties right now, and I can find more properties, we can building on top of some of the garages is not factored into some of this. But if I got 200 units per each property, I'd be looking at 3,600, maybe 4,000 units that we otherwise wouldn't get. So that's a part of it. Now, if we could talk about a third of a development being affordable, all of a sudden the 32,000 units that we know are going to be built becomes 11,000 affordable units, so that's twice what we otherwise would have gotten. If we can figure out how we can use and integrate some of these new construction techniques into things, and believe me, regular developers are looking at this stuff too. I mean, everybody's motivated because of the cost of construction to try to push that down. That might open more channels, because if we know that a developer is building something for less money, then it's easier for the county to subsidize. And I meant this, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, I do not like high-rises, and I don't like them, and when I was on the council, everything they zoned in Bethesda was high-rise. I asked the planning director, what's the makeup of 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms in the high-rises? It was like 80% 1 bedrooms, and the next 20% was split between efficiencies and 2 bedrooms. So first place, they weren't building any family housing, and it was extraordinarily expensive. And in Bethesda, with the densities and heights they give them, only a few buildings could actually be built to use up all that density. My solution would have been to limit heights to 8 to 10 stories where you can build in stick. Stick is half the price of construction that concrete and tall buildings are. We would have gotten the same number of units over more buildings, which would, if you're interested in revitalization and remaking the place, you would have remade more of it. You would have gotten the same amount of housing, but you would have gotten in lower-rise buildings, where if I had to subsidize it, it would have been a lot easier for me to subsidize a unit that cost them $200,000 to build than a unit that cost them $500,000 to build. So little things like that make a difference. There was a study that got suppressed. They were going to look at garden apartments, because garden apartments are one of the most cost-effective ways to build housing units. And they walked away from the study because the study would have shown that it was one of the most cost-effective ways. So I'm going to work both at it from a policy perspective, but also working with the council members. But the other part is working with the community. I've talked with AIM. All these people who are concerned about affordable housing have to be willing to take the leap and push a little bit harder. And I've reassured, when I was on the council, affordable housing advocates used to be afraid of pushing because they're afraid they were going to get punished. And I've told people I work with, you can push me as hard as you want. I'm not going to punish you. I'd like to do more. So push me, push the council. And that's what we need to do, is we need to get pushed. You can help push us.
So, speaking of the push, and after this question, I'm going to go to anyone who has a question to ask of the county executive, since we don't know how much more time we have out here. So speaking of the push, I wanted to give you an opportunity to clarify your stance on something that has been in the news, which is around the Chevy Chase Library
Yeah.
development. And there was some pushback on you about your stance and you championing or not championing that project, which there were advocates that wanted it to be affordable housing. So I want to give you the opportunity to clarify where your stance is on that project, but also other projects that come up that we hear about where there are community members who are on different sides, and how, as county executive, can you help sort of bring us together so that it's not a conversation about the NIMBYs versus the YIMBYs, but really how we bring our communities forward and be an inclusive community, and that we are building in a way that attracts and retains our diversity in Montgomery County.
So I'll start with the library question first. The only reason the library question became a question is because I put out a study and a request for proposals for building housing on top of the library. It was my idea to do a study to find out if we could build housing on top of the library. So when people started saying, my God, he doesn't want to build housing on top, it's like, wait a minute. If I hadn't done this, we wouldn't even be talking about it right now. Now, we did it, we asked people to make proposals, and the proposals we got in my mind, didn't work. Some proposals included no affordable housing whatsoever. One proposal would have produced so many units that it would have been a major disaster, and I would have gotten my 15%. And I'm not interested in giving them that much density and only getting 15% out of the deal. So what I told my staff to do, and mind you, this was for a project that was in 2027, so I wasn't like in a hurry to do it this year. I just thought if there was an opportunity, I would jump on it. I didn't get the offers I want, but we're already talking to people about a combination of apartments and townhouses. I want a stick of townhouses at the very least that would be ownership housing for people in lower incomes, and that's something nobody offered me in this. So we're putting it back in another round. We're talking to a couple of building groups. We're talking with Habitat for Humanity, who would be interested in building the townhouses, and we'll come up with something. But I can tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to get as many affordable units as I can. I am not going to buffer them with market units. There's plenty of market units down the hill at Chevy Chase Lakes. They're building almost all market units down there. There's a boatload of expensive stuff in Bethesda, so I want to fit this moderate gap, up to 100, down to 30 on and around the library. So that's what I'm going to do, and that's where we were. The bigger question of
Bringing people together, getting outside of the NIMBY versus NIMBY.
So I do a lot of work with communities, and I help organize people. But when I go in and organize, I tell people no is not an answer. And I'm very blunt. I've done this whether it was in Westbard or whether it was in Aspen Hill. You cannot say no to things. You can't. The world is not going to not change. But you've got to engage people in the process of change. So if you don't like what you see, tell the planners what you want to see in its place. Have a conversation about how do you accommodate this. It is not good, I don't think anyway, to try to impose change on a community without talking to them. It's the thing I like least about Thrive. I was trying to do Thrive during the middle of the pandemic, but I guarantee you nobody was wondering what the planning board was doing about rezoning the county. Nobody was thinking. People were thinking about staying alive. And the idea that they'd had the nerve to do something like this when people are asleep, it just is unconscionable to me. I would never do a major thing like this without making sure I had the full engagement of the community. But I think, in my experience, has been that by working with people, you actually get the compromises. That's why we were able to do the project on Bushy Drive. That's why in Bethesda I've been able to work with these developers that off of Wisconsin Avenue we were talking about, backing up to a residential neighborhood. It's why we were able to get an agreement on how to go ahead and do this. Not by saying, no, you're not going to do anything, but by making sure that everybody gets something out of the game. And I look at this as, community building 101. You start by involving people and inviting them in the beginning of the process, not by saying, this is what we're going to do, give you 2 minutes to comment on a microphone. The thing that got me into politics was the day I realized that I get, I was city council then, but then I was also going to the Montgomery County Council. You get 2 minutes or 3 minutes to make a comment, and then they vote on it. Nobody's ever, if you're voting on things after you comment, they've never read it, they've never thought about it, and they've never discussed it. So I decided I wanted to be on the other side of the microphone because I wanted to be the person who said, you have to listen to people or you have to talk to people. Because I think, I may not agree with everybody, but at the end of the day, you can't even move the needle forward if you're not willing to work with everybody.
All right. Hey, what's going on, man? How are you? Good to see you. No cough all over here. Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Nice cue.
My name's Will Smith. I'm your state senator. And thank you, Mark. This is a great presentation. I didn't know the deficit of the MPDUs and kind of the relationship. I didn't know the whole. I didn't have the whole field vision for the entire county. And I just first want to commend you for offering innovative solutions from the modular prefab housing to extracting more MPDUs from the unit to no net loss over the course of development. I think those are really innovative solutions. There's things that our regional partners are not doing as effectively, as you mentioned, as we could. My question would be is, and Jhanealle alluded to this earlier, was not only the next council, but the next General Assembly. How can we partner with you in the future to ensure that we're doing all we can? I know that Jhanealle has been a leader in this, especially for the rent stabilization. And I always talk about this, how the municipalities can be a laboratory for the counties, but the counties can also be a laboratory for the state. So how can Montgomery County lead for the state, and how can we from the state help you in your endeavors for securing more affordable housing here in Montgomery County?
So there are a couple of things you guys could do. And mostly it all begins with money. because what is it? Thoughts and prayers are nice, but I can't do anything without money. So, but it's partly policy. You don't have the same assistance for multifamily ownership housing, for example, that you have for multifamily rental housing. So if I want to do a condo project for people or a co-op for people, the dollars aren't there as readily. And why that's important, if the counties or the state get tied up in long-term ownership and rental property, we put the money in and then we wait a decade or two to get paid back when the thing sells or when the notes are paid off. When we do ownership with people, this is my vision for ownership, as I'll say. Nonprofit buys the property, holds it 5 years, spends 5 years educating the tenants, teaching them how to run a building, help people clean up their credit, help people get job training, all the things that would help lift them up so they're more capable, but also make sure they know when you're buying a building that you can handle it. I did 3 buildings in Tacoma Park as a council member that I literally met with the tenant groups and had them convert their buildings. And I would do all the preliminary analysis, and then I'd say, okay, when they're ready, I'd bring them 3 people. I'd say, pick one of these consultants here and go through the rest of the process. And they're all successful co-ops, and they were condos, and they really work. So we need programs that do that, because that money, once they've taken your money, done the conversion and everything else, then they sell the units off, you get the money back and you can recycle it again. Recycling money is really big, because if I can turn and churn money every 3 to 5 years, we're able to do more projects, as opposed to coming to you and saying, I want 50 million every year. Maybe I want 50 million for 3 years, and then I just keep recycling. So that's one place, particularly on the ownership, where you guys can be helpful. Down payment assistance is big for tenants. Low-income folks usually can't cross the down payment line, and being willing to be really flexible in down payments, I think, are important. Those are the 2 biggest things. And helping us with the feds. I mean, our message to the feds on how, we've already talked with the feds a little bit about housing, but housing and environmental stuff is, we're not asking questions, and I don't need study money anymore. Montgomery County is a place that if you give us money, we know what to do with it. I don't need another stinking study. Who's that? Frank Zappa said that, or something like that. We don't need to study things anymore. We know what we can do. So that's the kind of pitch we're making to people. And even the governor's housing folks have been pretty friendly to us. They've kind of recognized that we're doing things that other people aren't doing, and we don't say no to stuff. So we've had a beneficial arrangement, but he's been kind of miserly on the money. I think a Democratic governor could solve this problem.
Here? Yeah. Mark, I think your idea of using those pieces of property that the county owns and turning them into magic beans is really very interesting. And I bet the state has pieces of property of equal interest that are underutilized, and that might be an area worth exploring.
But Purple Line in Brookville, empty lot that's being used temporarily by the state for staging, and I'd be happy to take that off their hands.
For instance.
Yes, for instance.
And I wonder about other kinds of locations that I'm thinking about, buildings around Tacoma Park that are underutilized or vacant, or that are also potentially promising areas. And I wonder how that kind of a brainstorming activity could yield other places for housing to go, and how the community could come to the county with suggestions and ideas. Do you have any kind of a platform for people to bring suggestions to the county?
We take suggestions all the time. When I think of Tacoma Park, I think of New Hampshire Avenue. It's one of the busiest streets in the state. It's amazing how much traffic goes down New Hampshire. And it's...
Mike is for you, Mark.
Whoever thought I was soft-spoken? So New Hampshire Avenue's got enormous potential because it's massively underdeveloped. And when I was on the council, I always wondered about that, and people talked about bringing people in. I think, and I would work with the city to do this, to put a full court press on, trying to assemble property over there. You've got Harvey, who's got his stupid AutoZone on the corner, which is an eyesore and a real antithesis to economic development. But we would like to get rid of some of those things and then redevelop them. I'd like to make the owners part of it, because a lot of times, they don't want to get bought out because they get whatever's on the table, and then the people who buy the property get the long-term gain. I'd rather try to figure out a way to get them engaged so they would get a piece of the action, so they'd be incentivized to want to upgrade their properties rather than, be losers in that count. And maybe they'd be willing to deal with me if they understood that I was interested in helping them rather than just trying to rip them off of their property so I could do something else. So that's one of the things I'd like to do. We've looked at, that's why we started looking at the tops of garages. We have garages in the county that could take 5 stories of development on top of them. And so we're looking to see what we can do on top of garages. We're swapping property over in Brookville where that other piece of property is. HOC, for reasons unknown to any rational being, bought a lot with a massive radio tower on it and cannot sell it and cannot buy housing on it, put housing on it. So we're looking to swap them, and we're going to park our vehicles that are across the street over there and store stuff. And then we're going to work with HOC to redevelop our parking lot over there into a housing development together. So I'm looking for any place I can do stuff. So anybody sees a vacant piece of land or underutilized piece of land, I'm interested.
Call 1-800 BUILD-HERE or something,
Yeah.
or like, tell us how to do that, yeah.
Look, I never thought being a developer could be this much fun. Yeah,
I have a question.
millennial.
Hello, you. So one of the main talking points that I hear from people that oppose your views on housing is that if we just continue building more housing at more market rate housing, then we can create the pipeline for more of those affordable units that you're affordable units that you're talking about, and those units that that we do need to preserve, that we do need to. But that's one of the main criticisms that I hear. So can you talk to that?
Well, first, you can find that line at the American Enterprise Institute and other Koch brother-funded organizations that take this market approach, which is really kind of sinister because they say you build more new housing and then the older housing gets depressed in price and it keeps getting depressed in price. Well, you know why it gets depressed in price? It's because it doesn't get maintained and it's not kept up like the other housing. So eventually it's cheap enough that only poor people were willing to live there. I mean, it is not the way the world works. Montgomery County went through a housing boom in the 90s. We were building 12,000 housing units a year. And Tacoma Park had rent control then. We had to make a finding every year that there was a crisis in affordable housing. We had no problem making that finding because the number of affordable housing units was going down, even as we were building record new housing at a record pace. So there is no connection from that except in people's imaginations. And another good example is in Bethesda, where the price of the new units are so far above the existing units that the existing units aren't being depressed. Those units that I said were $1,800 or $2,000, they're not being forced to be cheaper because if the next market unit is $4,000 for a 2-bedroom, there's still a place in the world for your $2,000 apartment. You don't need to lower the price. So as Sharon Boulevard, she's no radical. She was the supervisor in Fairfax, head of the Board of Supervisors there. She got up at a COG meeting and she said, the only affordable housing that gets built is the affordable housing we require. No one will do what we need if we don't require it. If we don't require it, it will not happen. Jonathan over in White Oak, Kate, when he was in front of the council, objected to having affordable housing requirements. He says, I prefer to do it of my own free will. And I'm like, I'll do it. But like, nah, just agree to it. You'll feel really good agreeing to something. But yeah, I mean, it's a problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming out here and explaining all of this to us, because I have to say that having lived in Montgomery County for over 30 years now, I do have a lot of questions as to how housing policy gets made. And I'm probably going to leave with more questions than I had when I came here, which is maybe a good thing, because you've gotten me to think. But I do have big questions about housing and how it relates to the bigger system of living. For example, are the housing units that are supposed to be more affordable, are they going to actually have access to health care for the people who live there, access to grocery stores and healthy food? What's the walkability index, and are there requirements for that? What I've noticed in the past 30 years is that many, many more developers have come in. So when people are buying houses, it's not, you or me or this gentleman right here. It's actually big developers who buy huge swatches of land and put up 500 or 1,000 or many. So it's very difficult for the little Joe or the little, Jill or whoever non-binary to actually buy a house. So you're talking about opportunities for people to buy more houses. How about opportunities for people who already have houses to share their houses? So not just accessory apartments, but ability to rezone and actually turn a large single-family house into a multi-unit place where it's not a developer or a big company, but actually an individual.
So that's a tough one, because it depends how you do that. Park and Planning did a study for Silver Spring. They looked at, Thrive's proposition is that you can build 2 or 3 units where there's one. And what the study said was the units that will be built would be more expensive than the units that's there today. Because you as an individual, I don't know you, but I trust you because you sound real and sincere. But if most people sell their houses, they're not selling it so they can live in it and have some other units with them. They're going to be on the market. And I can tell you the name of the company that's going to come along. They do this all the time. They build sticks of 3. Think about where the Art Center is in Silver Spring. There are these condos that have been, townhouses that have been built there, right? Those townhouses are $900,000. They're more expensive than single-family houses in the neighborhood. And so you can put 3 20-foot wide townhouses on a 60-foot wide residential lot. They are not going to build affordable housing. So what you've described is, sort of carving your house into multiple
Existing housing.
Existing housing. I think, Tacoma Park had that, and then we were forced to get rid of all of it. When I came on the council in 1987, the county enforced the 10-year-old law that forced the reconversion of all the houses that had been cut up. But what had happened wasn't good, because a lot of the houses had cardboard walls, didn't have real kitchens, and so there were disasters waiting to happen. So there may be a way to do that, but finding a balance between somebody wanting to do what you're talking about and turning this over to the developers who will simply continue to pave the place over is a problem. It also, for us, it's environmental, because all projections for how many people are going to come to Montgomery County on 5-year increments over a 30-year horizon. So when you hear a 2050 plan, it means they started on the numbers in 2020. That's based on existing zoning. And so they look at all the places that have been zoned in Montgomery County, and they say, this is what we think will be built. Most of that stuff now is townhouses. You subtract the high-rises in Bethesda that are left and the ones in Silver Spring. Most of the stuff is in places where you'll be looking at either smaller apartments or you'll be looking at townhouses, more affordable units. 2 things that are environmentally challenging. If you bleed development into a neighborhood, then places like Wheaton don't get the houses they were supposed to get, or don't get the units. The idea of Wheaton, Silver Spring, Bethesda, Twinbrook, all these places was to get enough people concentrated there that you can actually have amenities. And so if you don't get the people in the concentrated areas directly adjacent to transit, you don't get the amenities. The other thing you don't get is affordable housing. If you build fewer than 19 units on a lot, you don't have to provide any affordable housing in Montgomery County. So if you take a single-family lot and you build 3 units, there's no affordable housing. If they were doing this in a building in Bethesda or Wheaton that had 20 or more units, I would be getting affordable units out of it. And the last thing is environmental. If, in order to affect what they want to do, you wind up paving over large portions of the lot. We have major stormwater problems right now because of the impervious surface. So if I increase the amount of impervious surface in residential areas that are covered mostly in green, our stormwater system won't be able to handle it. It's not handling it today. Tacoma Park's got giant messes with stormwater, so it's going to be a problem. On the other hand, I don't think you could harm a blade of grass building something in Wheaton or downtown Silver Spring. You wouldn't find grass anywhere. So for me, if you're going to do the density, do it where you've already wrecked the place in terms of greenness, because you can't do any more damage there. But it's going to be expensive if you don't do that. Can't build the quantity of housing they need. They know that fixing this one house at a time in a neighborhood. I mean, the idea of how long it would take to convert how many houses and how many neighborhoods to solve an affordable housing problem, when you can be talking about major developments in the urban areas that were designed to hold it, that's where most of the people who are building want to go. And so that's what we're going to do. I think the only way to silence those folks is to eventually see that we're producing units. You never hear them talking about me putting 18 properties on the market. They focus on Chevy Chase Library, they're obsessed with, but putting 18 units, putting 18 large properties on the market that'll produce, could potentially thousands of units, they don't think about it at all. And most of them are in Bethesda and Silver Spring and areas they would consider wealthy. So to me, this is just political kabuki in the middle of an election season. And I don't know, you think they saw that I guess somebody told them that we didn't accept the bids that weren't bids, they were proposals that came in on the library. But like I said in the beginning, it was my idea to even see if it was feasible. So I could have avoided that just by not even asking the question. So I think time will fix this, and getting out of the political season will fix it. Once we all have to sit down and make progress, I think everybody will try to sit down and figure out how we make progress.
I have a question. You mentioned before Habitat for Humanity, and this goes into your comments about splitting up existing homes. On Garland Avenue, there is I'm not sure that it's finished yet, but there's a current project where they took a single-family home and turned it into like a duplex situation. Now, I don't know whether it's Habitat's intention to sell off each unit at market rate in order to fund other projects, or whether they're actually putting Habitat families in there. But
They almost always put.
It just seems to me that that's precedent for exactly what you said. That if there happened to be, say, an older person who has limited income who happens to have a house that could be split up in two or three apartments, that wouldn't they be able to use that particular example as precedent to go ahead and do it on their own and live in one of the units themselves?
The most you can get right now by right is 2 units in a house, the main unit and the secondary unit. And Habitat basically builds houses. I mean, they're not looking for, I don't know if they've gotten into having second units. One of the projects we're talking about, potentially for the library, is like a 2-over-2 situation or a 2-over-1, where we have, a smaller unit on the ground floor and then a 2-story townhouse above it. Those are things, we're trying to do to figure out how to get a little bit more out of the space we have there. But Habitat is interested in that. They mostly do ownership. In fact, they only do ownership. And I can't imagine them doing a for-market deal in order to make money for later down the road. I think they'll put people in that belong in it.
Some Habitat, groups, like the one in Baltimore County, actually does that from time to time. So.
Could you speak a little bit about the escalation of the cost of housing right here in Tacoma Park? I've been here since 1993, and the price of housing, single units, is out of sight, and it's affecting the community and who lives here and who can walk their kids to school and who can age here successfully. Can you speak to what is going, we're on the perimeter of DC, which is very hot, so that really, spikes up the prices. So what is your plan for what's going to go on?
I cannot think of any way to depress the market. The fact is that, and pandemic may have made it worse, because we've seen an outflow of people who don't necessarily want to live in an apartment building, they don't want to deal with elevators. And so we've seen this rapid, we've seen movement, we've seen rapid escalation in price. My house in assessment has probably doubled in 5 years. It went up when I fixed it up. I got that, that was fine. But the doubling on top of that seemed a bit excessive. But with our teachers who are out of the county because the only place they can find something affordable is out of the county. But I don't control land prices and I don't control the market. So that's a hard one to figure. I mean, the good thing is usually not knocking out low-income people from housing. At least it's not having that effect. But it's certainly limiting, whether this housing is going to be affordable to middle-class people or whether you're going to, it's only going to be affordable to very wealthy people. And that would radically change Tacoma Park.
Mark, please.
I have a question. I appreciate your innovative approach to getting affordable housing in the county. It's great. My concern is at the other end, for people to be able to continue to live here, especially seniors who've been here a long time. Currently, the county has a program, it's a tax, I don't know whether it's called a rebate or a discount. If you're over 65, you've lived in your home for 40 years or more, and it's moderately priced, assessed at no more than $650,000, there's a 20% discount on your property tax. But it expires in 5 years. How does that make any sense?
I didn't write that.
How can it be changed?
Well, so we just extended, we just sent notices out to people that we're extending it, and then the council, we're doing an emergency thing, and then the council's going to have to tackle it. What I would like to do, that other jurisdictions have done, is to, at a certain age and income, because there's no reason to give this tax break to people who make a ton of money.
But this is at least a house, it has to be a modest house.
So, but see, this is to her point, what we all thought was a modest house once has become not modest. It may look modest, it may feel modest, but the price is not modest.
Can you even buy a house
So
for
I'd be,
$600,000?
so I'd be more concerned about your income than the tax assessment on your house. Because it's like you're being assessed for something that you're not going to benefit from until you sell it. So one of the things other jurisdictions have done is they've taken, say, your senior population, and you'd say at the age of 65, at a certain income, any increase in the taxes will be deferred until you dispose of the house. So when you transfer the house or you sell the house, then we'll take the money out of the profits. And since we know where housing prices have gone, there will be profits. And that part of the tax is not that huge. I mean, if Tacoma Park, a $600,000 house, you're paying $9,000 in taxes, right? About $1 for the county and about 50 cents for the city. So you would defer a portion of everything that goes up, so your tax rate at least stays steady. And so you won't be building up a debt of tens of thousands of dollars. You might wind up over 10 years with maybe 10 or 15,000, but that ought to work with the inflation of the house value when you go to sell it. That would give older residents a break from facing ever-rising taxes on top of everything else they're having to deal with.
Right, I mean, there is a break now if you meet certain income requirements, it's really low. Because my house, when I applied 2 years ago, it was assessed at less than $650,000. But I'm thinking, I'm not going to suddenly get more wealthy when I reach 80.
Nope.
It's just not going to happen.
No, none of us are. Probably less wealthy.
Yeah, so I don't understand that. I don't understand it.
You did hear him say that that's been changed, and you should be getting something in the mail?
Well, it's,
Yes.
yeah, but it's, looking on the county website today, there's no indication of that.
They sent out mail last week. If you're talking about the same program I'm talking about, you should see the mail.
It's the homestead.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the homestead is.
That's homestead's different.
It's
This
not
is-
homestead, it's not homestead.
This is different tax.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, this is the 40-year thing.
So let me know, and I know who you are. So I'll take a look and see what they've done with
If I don't receive
that.
anything, I'll let you know.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I would like to do the tax deferral, because I think it's low cost to us, and the banks won't be mad at us, because we know we're going to get the tax revenues anyway, since no one's immortal. So it's guaranteed payback.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yes.
have a question for Jhanealle, actually. So, are you going to be able to take another crack at some of the housing legislation in Annapolis? Like, I know just cause eviction was your big thing last session. Social housing, that's something that Vaughn Stewart was trying to propose. That probably went nowhere. But what is the landscape looking like in Annapolis for kind of more broad-scale housing policies? And could a Democratic governor who doesn't happen to live in this immediate area potentially get us moving forward in that direction?
That's a great question. Thank you. And I was actually sitting here thinking that I wanted to chime in around the governor's race and us making sure that if we care about the issues that were discussed today, if we care about affordable housing, if we care about making sure that people at all different incomes can stay in our community and be able to afford to live here, we need to ensure that we have a governor that is willing to help transform our Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, which is our housing agency at the state level. Every time I meet with a Democratic candidate, I talk with them about DHCD and the lack of proactiveness in addressing our state housing issues. DHCD has become more of a clearinghouse around handing out funds, working with the developers and to finance different projects, and really close and buddy-buddy with developers. And what we really need them to do is be looking at and digging into these challenges that we're talking about. Is there a jurisdiction that's making some progress where DHCD at the state level can help create spaces to sort of do problem solving between agencies in different counties? Can DHCD look nationally and do research and help make recommendations around how we can be on the cutting edge of transforming our communities, having better housing opportunities, instead of DHCD being more of a dormant organization, even on renters issues and renters' rights, looking at trends, how are evictions looking across the different jurisdictions? How can we make sure that we stem the tide on those? And so as you are considering, if anyone's still considering, their support for someone on the second floor in Annapolis, who will join us in Annapolis in the next year, to make sure they have an actual plan for housing and transforming that department. Because as someone who works on housing issues, that agency certainly has not been one that has been helpful in the sense of being an advocate around housing. And that's really what we need statewide, and that's what we need our agency to do. Now, when it comes on the legislative side, that's more on the executive side at the state level. On the legislative side, we have, because of the pandemic, had a landmark couple of years when it comes to housing issues, specifically dealing with renters and renter protections. I mean, previously, before the pandemic, you were pretty much laughed out of town when you try to pass a pro-renter bill. And there's a very strong landlord lobby that we've struggled to really overcome a lot of their pushbacks. One of the things that didn't end up making it to the finish line, but I'm really, really proud of, is that I actually had a rent stabilization bill that made it to the Senate floor. It was a bill that had a number of things regarding the pandemic in it, and I also snuck in there something that Montgomery County did, which the bill said no rent increases at all for a period of time that was about a year and a half. We didn't know how long the pandemic was going to be, but it was about a year and a half of no rent increases. And can you believe that bill made it to the Senate floor, which is unheard of, to get a majority of the House and a lot of the Senate to support that piece of legislation. We did make progress this year with legislation that would require a landlord, before they evict someone, to actually show that they're following the local laws and that they have a landlord license. This is something that's basic, right? Let's make sure that you are licensed in order to protect renters and make sure that places are up to code and things like that. That was heavily debated on the House floor. It's a very controversial bill, to the point that I wasn't expecting to stand up and speak on it, but I ended up standing up and speaking on it because the debate was just so raw around that very basic issue. We did get that across the finish line, but the governor vetoed it. And so we are going to have to start all over again with that bill because we're not able to override a veto once we elect a new General Assembly. We passed, which Senator Smith was instrumental in this. This was in his committee as the chair of JPR, access to counsel so that renters will be able to have a landlord when they are in eviction court, which I've spent a lot of time watching eviction court in Montgomery County. And you see landlords get up there with their attorneys. You see renters who are there by themselves just trying to defend themselves and maybe keep their home, and they're trying to explain things, and they're just getting sort of rolled over by the entire process in the courtroom. So having an attorney will really be transformational, and we passed the funding that goes with it on this legislative session as well. So there has been a good amount of movement over the last couple of years. It's very unfortunate that it took a pandemic for there to be, you know, sort of this opportunity for my colleagues to really understand the needs of renters and for the challenges to really rise to the top. But yes, we have much work to do. I think that the number one thing that we can do is really transform DHCD to be partners. As a legislator, having a partner at the state agency who are really working together to advance the issues that we're talking about would really be something that would be impactful. And many of these bills that I'm talking about, the ones that didn't pass, we bring them back and really continue to push. So thank you for the question about the work at the state level as well.
On that, where did just cause eviction go this year? I didn't follow that one very closely this time around.
Yes, good question. One of the bills that I've been introducing for several years now is around just cause eviction. It ensures that at the end of a lease, if a landlord chooses not to renew it, they have to provide a cause, they have to provide a reason. And if you've been a renter recently, I can say that as someone who's rented for 12 years in downtown Silver Spring, you get to that moment when it's time, when your lease is up, and there's two concerns that are kind of very, very scary. One is, my lease going to be renewed? If you want to stay, will you be able to stay, or will you have to find another place that you can afford in this very expensive county? And two, how much is my rent going to go up? Am I going to be able to afford a rent increase? And the Just Cause Eviction Bill really addressed the issue around lease renewal, providing a reason to make sure that if someone is going to be pretty much put out and not have the roof over their head and have 60 days to search for another place that's suitable that they can afford, that there's at least a cause that is provided. And if it goes to court, then that cause can be discussed in the proceedings as well. And that bill, this legislative session, we had two gubernatorial candidates come testify. We had the Baltimore City, support from the Baltimore City mayor. We had Howard County, a wonderful county executive, came on Zoom and testified. It was an amazing statewide effort in terms of having statewide leadership on it. We have challenges with that committee in terms of it moving forward, but it has the votes on the floor, so all we have to do is make sure that we get it out of committee. So I'll be continuing to introduce that bill.
The committee that's sitting on is in the Environment and Transportation Committee, and the chair of that committee is a Montgomery County legislator, so you guys should be pressuring him. He wants to hear from Montgomery County residents, so.
She said it.
Not her.
You said it, not us. But I just want to, if I could, for a second, like why the leadership at the executive level and the gubernatorial level, and then also in Annapolis matters. So every bill that Jhanealle talked about came out of my committee in the Senate side, which would not have happened under my predecessor, right? So, and that's, we have the first African American Speaker of the House, first woman Speaker of the House, has installed leadership, for the most part, that is pushing forward, you know, a different type of agenda. And if you had a partner in the governor's mansion, imagine what we could do. Because now the calculus in Annapolis is not about whether you can get a bill on the floor or pass, it's about whether you have a veto-proof majority. And so, in terms of the actual product that gets to the floor and then through, it actually matters. And to have a partner back home in the largest jurisdiction in the state, over 1.2 million people,
somewhere around there,
most diverse, most economically, the economic engine of our state, the largest jurisdiction behind us, and you can see some of the things we can do. We're on the cusp of being able to do if you get the right person in the governor's mansion. It's kind of a trifold piece, and so just when you're weighing your decision for the next gubernatorial spot, just keep that in mind, because there's really no limit to the possibilities that we can do if we get those three things right.
Could you rank choice the
I would
gubernatorial
love to rank
candidates?
choice. I like rank choice.
I was going to ask you if you'd rank choice the gubernatorial candidates.
Oh, look at the time.
Unfair question. I just want to say, when you were talking about when you go in front of the legislature, how unfriendly it is. I used to be the regional vice president for the Maryland Low Income Housing Coalition, and we would go up and testify, and whatever that godforsaken committee was where all the tenant legislation went, and the landlords would be there and their lawyers, and we'd be there. And the lawyers are sitting, and when a delegate, back then they could smoke in the chamber, when a delegate reached for a cigarette, they pop out of their seats and they go up and light the cigarettes for him. When they came up to testify, it's like, how's your wife? All this other stuff. And when we would get up to testify, it was, Mr. Elrich, testify. Thank you. And that was it. You could tell that you were never going to get anything passed because I was in a club of friends and I was not one of the friends. It was really old-fashioned, but the cigarette thing killed me. I had not seen that, anywhere where they're just leaping out of their seats to get these guys cigarettes lit. Strange.
Now they do it in the back room.
True.
It's got to be a chapter in your book.
Please, a lot of the new Annapolis people would not imagine that the smoke, literally a smoke-filled room. It's amazing.
Well, I think it's about
Yep.
about that time. It's
So,
8:03.
thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Will, Jhanealle, for participating in this. And I hope some of you understand what we're dealing with a little different. I am trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And it's really easy to say, I want to build more housing, but it really does matter what you do. And you got to have intentionality. And if we don't have intentionality about what we're doing, we're just going to run people out of town. It is heartbreaking to think what happens to folks. I taught at Rolling Terrace. One of the reasons I liked rent control in Tacoma Park was parents would talk about what they had done to sacrifice to live in Montgomery County instead of Prince George's County because of the schools. And to think that these people would get pushed back, to a place where they could, the developers or the apartment owners used to say people should live where they can afford. And then they go about making sure the place isn't affordable. And we cannot go back to that. And that's my concern is what we're doing in the county and the way we're building housing and what we're allowing is going to send us back to the point where it's going to be what you just need to live where you can afford, and it's sure as hell not going to be here. And then, you can't talk about a welcoming, diverse county unless your policies make that thing happen. People just don't decide to be diverse and, in welcoming, that's their life. They've got to be accepted for who they are, not some mythical idea. This is not just a concept, it has to become reality. So that's my pitch, and thank you all very much, really.
Thank the organizers.